As I was reading through David Weber's book, Weber's book on Bach, Beethoven, and the Boys, I came across two composers he talks about, Schubert and Schumann. And there were just two takeaways that I wanted to share with all of you from that. I'll give you the takeaways up front, then I'll talk about some of the eccentricities of their life, and we'll call it a day at that. We won't call it a day, we'll call it a video. The two takeaways are this. It's never too late to start composing and or creating, and you will have failures sometimes as you go. That's okay. And number two, you may not always receive positive feedback right away on stuff that actually is good. That's not a lie to tell you something that maybe really doesn't work is fantastic, even though people tell you it's not. It's that maybe you are actually latching onto something and you know that, and you should probably make sure that you hear from enough people on your creative work. The issue with a classroom setting is that you receive my feedback alone. Showing parents, friends, family, getting their feedback to the things that you create is a good way of gauging an overall general reaction to something that you are creating. And I tell you this as I launch into talking about Schubert and Schumann. How do you tell them apart? Well, David Weber puts it interestingly. He actually indicates that Schubert was a small, pudgy man who wore wire-rimmed glasses, and Schumann was married to Clara Schumann, who was one of the most famous piano concert players of the time, with a 60-year piano concert career that changed the whole landscape of what piano concerts were to be from that point on. Schubert was born first in 1797, and he only lived 31 years. Schumann was born after that, I believe, 1810, and he became a composer later on in life and actually studied and found and researched Schubert's old work himself. So there was connection between the two of them. Schubert composed this piece, Erlkönig, which is one of his most famous lieder, and I'll talk about those in a second. And lieder are basically just ballads. They are these songs that are solo vocal pieces with piano accompaniment, and he wrote 600 of them in his lifespan. He also wrote 9 symphonies. There was some unfinished business there at the end with some of those, but he's considered to be one of the only composers that could write as fast as Mozart. Age 11, he showed a lot of promise. Then he started teaching in his father's music school and realized he hated teaching, and he was meant to be a composer. So he went and became a full-time composer and spent a lot of time just milling around with other artists and poets and creating music and songs. That's what he did. He thought that the government should probably employ him, hold him on retainer, because he created such amazing music. And yet almost none of it was published or appreciated during his lifetime. He had no real place in the musical landscape, and yet he's changed the way that actually all of our ballads are written now in today's modern understanding of them. Popular songs that you have heard both on Broadway and on the radio are influenced by the way that he composed, and he changed the music landscape forever of piano accompaniment with sung parts. It's really fascinating to study his piano accompaniments. If you're ever wondering how do you properly write piano music that can go along with a singer, his music is a fantastic place to start. On to Schumann. Schumann had almost no musical exposure until he was 20. He loved going to concerts. He started studying piano. He then built a device to strengthen his hand. He crippled 2 of his fingers, and he couldn't really play the piano anymore. He didn't have 2 fingers, so he would have had to play without the fingers that actually help you do a lot of the useful things. Now, there are musicians who are unable to use some of their fingers who can still play music incredibly. Nevertheless, he focused more on his compositional skills, and he had good success. He did some hilarious things. Beginning of his life, boring. Later on in his life, quite interesting. For instance, he started his own music journal. of which he was the editor. And then he wrote under 2 different pen names. The pen names were Florestan and Eusebius. And he gave these 2 writers 2 different personalities. So he would critique other people's works. He would critique Chopin's work, and he would write about it. And he'd also write about his own music, which helped him gain traction. He had over 200 or 250 of his own compositions that he created, and he did quite well with those. He had a failed opera. He tried to write an opera, and that just did not go well. The thing that I, as a music teacher, find hilarious is he tried conducting on occasion, and many people view conductors as people who are just flapping their arms around anyways, and someone else is doing the work. Brilliant conductors know the music inside out and backwards and can identify the smallest nuances of things and give criticism and critique as needed, and they're there to kind of help shape and mold the sound. Whereas, as some of you know from different band and music classes, I can throw one of you up there and you can flap your arms and the band's just playing. They're only somewhat paying attention to you and you're keeping time. And Schumann, this famous composer and someone who had actually studied music and then started to compose it, famously would keep on conducting sometimes after the music ended because he was just flapping his arms in the air. I want you to know that even if you feel like you can't compose right now, there are famous composers who created music that sometimes gained almost no reception. Sometimes they made up their own reception to the music and wrote about their own music, and then people started to pay attention. And sometimes they had terrible musical skills in certain areas and they were really good at other things. Being a creator is not about being perfect in every single avenue of your art form. It's about continuing to create, explore, compose, rework things, show different people, interacting in a way that will build you as an artist. You may not gain traction right away. That's okay. And you're not too old to already learn this. You may feel like you know nothing about composition, or you may feel like you only know a little and someone else knows a lot. It's okay. You can start. So start now. Go create something. Go create something awesome. Even if I don't think it's awesome, you think it's awesome. Create. Be a creative. All the best, Mr. West.